by pouring beer on it to douse the fire. And then they built a stone jail, and this would have been about 1850 something. And this stone jail was the one that figures in this story. The fella that ultimately got shot had been arrested for a couple times, and he escaped from jail both times. And it sounded like everybody was escaping from jail. And reading the Monroe Sentinel in 1869, it turned out that, in fact, was happening. Everybody was escaping from jail. And it got so bad that there was a grand jury indicted the jail as being unsafe and unfit. And this is right after the Civil War, and the Sentinel editorialized that if they don't replace the jail soon, you're going to have to raise a brigade, park them down there to protect the jail from the prisoners who are going to tear it down. So they did build a new jail, and that was the jailhouse tab. That's the story there. And the courthouse, since the trial of Angeline took place at the courthouse, that then became, let's see, how many courthouses have there been? This was the Greene County courthouse. There was one that didn't last a year. It was made of wood, and it burned down right away. And they didn't want to really raise the money to build another one. So the American House, which was a hotel on the southwest corner of the square, it's where the stages came in. It was operated by a guy named Glessner. And on the 1861 map, there's actually a picture of it up here. And one of the salient things that I've been able to uncover is that it was unusual for its time in that this Glessner must have been an abolitionist because he didn't serve liquor. In every other tavern, I think they made a lot of money by selling liquor, but not this one. So it was already built, so they rented out the second floor, and they had these were circuit courts that come through. And I guess the reason they call them circuit courts is that the judges and the attorneys would get on their horse and they'd ride the circuit. And that's what was going on then. Abe Lincoln was a circuit court lawyer. And you'd go from the first circuit for a couple weeks, and then you'd go to the second circuit. And Monroe happened to be in the second circuit. So it wasn't like we needed it 52 weeks a year. We just needed it when the spring term and the fall term of the circuit court was in Greene County. So they had a room on the second floor of the American House that they used as the courthouse. And the newspaper said that when court wasn't in session, it was a shoe store. So they got their money's worth. And then finally they built they call it Dunton's courthouse. It was a stone and brick affair. You see it in these old pictures. Apparently it had, this was the original, it was this dome, leaked badly. And within a very short period of time, it was replaced by a bell tower. And this, writers of the various Greene County histories compared it to a New England courthouse. And that's where the trial took place in 1869, in that courthouse. I can't get into a lot of what I've written so far. You'll have to buy the book. But I have a chapter on village life, and that was one of the fun things to write about, what all was going on in January of 1869. The entertainment. This is horse and buggy, sleighs and sleds. The church groups went down to Judah on a sleigh ride and back. That was a big deal. There was a debate at the Opera House. Compulsory education, good idea or bad idea? And people debated both sides. So, and there were plays that occurred in Monroe. That same time, Mark Twain was on a book tour and appeared in Freeport. He was promoting his first book, Innocents Abroad, which, nowadays people think of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer as the definitive Mark Twain, but that was, in his lifetime, his best-selling book was Innocents Abroad. And just like authors today, he was on a tour to promote it. And he spoke down at Freeport, and I think admission was a dime. And he got good reviews in the paper. So those are some of the things that you have an opportunity to talk about when you're going back in time almost 150 years. You try to paint a picture of what life was like, what the setting was like for these people that lived back there. I'll read a little bit of the first chapter that basically sets the story and tells you what happened. But I also then researched the woman, Angeline Schroyer. Who was she? Where did she come from? Where did she live? And the fella, Patrick Crotty, the same stuff. Where did he come from? Who were his parents? What were brothers and sisters? What were his circumstances? One of the real differences between these two, they were a young couple, and it was during the Civil War they met. They met at a spelling bee up in either Jordan. She lived in Jordan. He lived in Adams. These are towns on the western tier. Of Greene County. And they started to date. And during the Civil War, he first made an engagement with her and said, well, we can't get married during the Civil War. We got to wait till after the war. So that was how they met. And in her trial testimony, those are the questions. Where did you first meet? And it's pretty interesting to read that kind of a first person, unfiltered by a newspaper or a history of Greene County or anything like that. This is raw data. So it made a pretty interesting story. But I'd like to read to you a little bit about what happened and how it happened. And the first chapter basically is the newspaper's account of all this. But as Larry knows, Larry and a few of us have a habit of congregating down at the used bookstore on Wednesday afternoon. And we talk about books and writers and various things. And for instance, we mostly agree that we like a title, but we don't like subtitles on a book. Nowadays you get a book, and the subtitle goes on and on and on. But we really like epigraphs too. So I found 3 epigraphs that I thought were apropos of this murder and trial in Greene County. This first one is from Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice. Though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. The second one is from the Bible, Timothy 1, chapter 1, verse 8 and 9. But we know that the law is good if man use it lawfully. Know this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners. And my third epigraph is from Hank Williams. Remember the song, On Top of Old Smoky? Here's some lyrics. On top of Old Smoky, I went there to weep, for a false-hearted lover is worse than a thief. A thief, he will rob you and take what you save, but a false-hearted lover will put you in your grave. They'll hug you and kiss you and tell you more lies than the cross ties on the railroad or stars in the sky. So it's part of the joy of doing this research and doing the writing is putting it all together. So, chapter 1. Patrick Crotty would not marry his pregnant fiancée, Angeline Schroyer, and refused to pay any support after the birth of their child. She had him arrested. He escaped from jail and ran away. She sued him, won a judgment, and he ran away again. He still would not pay any support, nor would he pay the amount of the judgment. So when he showed up, married, drunk, and abusive, at the hotel where she worked in the kitchen, she shot him dead. Sent him a leaden messenger, as the newspaper put it. It was the first murder in the history of the village of Monroe, about 3 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, January 13, 1869, in the sitting room of the Monroe House, a hotel near the northwest corner of the public square. The newspaper headline of this the next week started out, "A call from above." The call was answered. To announce it. The newspaper went on to describe the killing in an understatement as a fatal unpleasantness between a well-to-do farmer and a servant girl whom he had seduced under the promise of marriage. Now, the Sentinel was the weekly newspaper in Monroe, and its masthead advertised it as the official paper of the county. So I am assuming that legal notices were published in this paper even then. And it was staunchly Republican, as was much of Greene County and Monroe right after the Civil War, the party of Lincoln. And it was edited by A.J. High and Charles A. Booth. And the editors, in writing this story after the killing, qualified their sources this way. They said, "From various parties we learn the following particulars concerning this terrible affair, and vouch for the truth of the reports only as far as they appear to be the versions of many persons condensed and corroborated." Now, newspapers in the 19th century seldom published a byline, so the assumption is that Booth and High, the editors, said all the copy, wrote all the ads, and wrote all the news themselves. Then came this revelation, an affront to Victorian and Reconstruction age sensibilities, social conventions, and sexual restraint. Quote, "It seems that Crotty was a gay deceiver, and among several young and inexperienced girls, Angeline was but one frail creature whom he had wronged after gaining their affections and promising to marry them. Before the birth of their son, that she named Francis Patrick, and receiving no support from the wealthy Crotty family, Angeline secured the services of a Monroe attorney, Mayor Medbury, who in 1866 began a series of legal actions against Patrick Crotty. In 1867, Patrick married another woman, thus obviating the best remedy. So anyway, she won a judgment, $700 plus the $43 court cost, and you've got the judge's itemization of what the court costs were in the papers. The Crottys proposed to settle for $100, a deal which she refused to accept. She wanted at least half the judgment, or $350. The Crottys then offered $300. She would take the money, she said, but would not sign a release. Then changed her mind and told her attorney that she did not want the money. Court costs and attorney fees were unresolved issues. Patrick had visited Angeline in the hotel here twice to talk settlement in the weeks before that fateful day of January 1869, when the newspaper reported Crotty, his wife, and mother-in-law came to town, and after getting well set up with courageous whiskey, went to beard the lioness in the Monroe house. That's their vote. Their pressures to settle escalated to curses and threats. Despite being warned that Angeline would not put up with any more abuse, continued the article, Patrick and his family commenced calling her names, and very indecent ones too. Whereupon the enraged girl drew a pistol and shot her seducer through the breast, near the heart, bullet lodging near his backbone. Crotty staggered and his hat fell off. He encountered the hotel landlord in the hall and had words with him, then passed out the front door to the sleigh. This was in winter, telling the driver to head for home and Adams. They went only a short distance before his stepmother smelled the powder and realized he had been shot. They returned to the hotel, and he was pronounced dead on arrival by a doctor. An inquest was held in the sitting room where he had been shot. The Sentinel said, "Great excitement prevailed. Screams from the unhappy man's wife and mother rent the air. Scholars returning from school lingered and swelled the motley throng of people, excited and crazy, for a man had been murdered in broad daylight." And of course, the school was just 2 blocks off the square.
Tom, what time of day was it?
3 in the afternoon. The girl calmly submitted to arrest and was escorted to jail down the block by Sheriff E.T. Gardner, who was compelled to keep back the crowd of Crotty's admirers at the point of his Navy Colt revolver, known as the Sentinel. They followed, however, at long range, shouting "murderess" through clenched teeth and drunken savage brains. No attempt was made to mount the girl, owing to the free expression from hundreds of men that it served him right. The sympathies of the paper were in accord with public opinion. Since her imprisonment, Angeline has been visited by many of the best women of our town, who have known her in their own homes as a faithful and innocent girl before her fall. The editors did not refrain from offering their regrets in the final paragraph of the page 3 story. "We regret that this sad affair occurred in our usually quiet village. We regret that man is wicked and that he so often brings upon itself the vengeance of fate. We regret that society has too long neglected to throw around the frail and guileless young women that protection which Christianity and mercy would dictate, and which, God save the mark, has too long countenanced the faithless seducer and prescribed the injured. For it is this sad state of affairs that brings woman to shame and causes despairing humanity to take the law of self-preservation and justice into its own hands to strike down the guilty." This is the newspaper. 12 days after the shooting on Monday, January 25th at 10 a.m., Angeline appeared before Justice Lewis Rote, well-known Monroe name, for examination. The counsel for the defense waived the exam, and the prisoner was held to bail in the sum of $3,500 for her appearance at the next term of the First Circuit Court of Wisconsin. By the end of the day, the requisite money was procured with Messrs. Ben Chenoweth, O.H.P. Clarno, John Thorpe, Minor Taylor, and other prominent Monroe citizens signing the bail bond. The Sentinel on January 27th reported that Angeline appears to be entirely indifferent as to the result of her trial and manifests no disposition to conceal her crime or evade the penalty of law. The sympathies of the people are with her. And then, oddly enough, the preacher at our old Universalist church, that we all know and love, Butler, Henry B. Butler, was in the habit of giving civil sermons. And the newspaper would print his civil sermon. So he went on a front page, bylined article all about the wickedness in the land that led to this shooting. I won't get into that in the book, but neither the Crotties nor the Schroyers were members of his congregation. Neither one of them lived in the village, so Elder Butler must have relied on newspaper accounts, hearsay, and the whisperings of his flock to prepare his sermon. And oddly enough, the week before this murder occurred, the Sentinel had run a letter to the editor, sort of thing, a column about fallen women that I thought was ironic. We published elsewhere today, the newspaper set up the letter in their words by saying, "We published elsewhere today an excellent article favoring the establishment of a state institution for the reformation of friendless and fallen women. We cordially agree with our correspondent. This is certainly a subject worthy of the serious consideration of the state legislatures. While benevolent societies and legislatures are providing asylums for inebriates and reform schools for boys, we think this most unfortunate class of women should not be entirely neglected by society. It is sad to think that very little effort has been made to reform degraded women. In this unjust discrimination between the guilt of men and women, the judgment of society is cruelly wrong. Is woman so much worse than a man that she cannot be reclaimed? We think not. She is often brought down to degradation by extreme poverty or the hellish devices of the seducer. But society has no sympathy for the woman. It crushes her down to infamy and death, while the villain who effected her ruin retains his position in the best circle.